First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Martin for his generous support for the colloquium. I'd like to thank Pak Primo for his attendance and his support and very kind opening words. Pak Dede, the Consul General, whose hospitality we'll all be enjoying tomorrow night. Thank you, Pak Dede. I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Bill Johnston, MLA, member for Cannington. I'd like to also acknowledge and thank Ms. Siobhan Lenahan, the Head of Programs of the Australian Learning and Teaching Council. And the ALTC is the major supporter of our colloquium here today. I'd like to also acknowledge and thank Ms. Amanda Day, the Director of Languages and the Asian Studies section of the National Curriculum Branch of the Department of Education, Employment and Workplace Relations. Thanks to, and I acknowledge all the international guests who've come. We'll have an opportunity to meet them during the course of the next few days. And to those of you who've come from near and far, from universities, from governments, from the community, I appreciate your preparedness to give of your valuable time to come and work together on this next issue over the next 3 days. Can I acknowledge the Nyunga people as the past and present traditional owners of the land on which we meet? I would like to, as I said, take a few minutes this morning just to provide something of the background of this gathering and the issues to be addressed, to outline how we might advance those over the next few days. Let me start by saying, when we think about Indonesian language and its value for the community, very often we're drawn into a discussion about the economic advantage of having Indonesian. I don't put that aside, and we'll have a session under the auspices of the Australia-Indonesia Business Council on Friday. But I would suspect that many of us in this room would have a different starting point. And that may well be the contribution that education about Indonesia and in Indonesian language makes to personal growth, to the connections between communities, and to the value for Australian-Indonesian relations. And it's there that I would like us to start today. I want to give 2 very different personal stories. With my colleagues from the ANU, I'd like to share our pride in the achievements of one Jennifer Robinson. Jennifer spent one of her 2 in-country semesters with Archichis learning with a human rights organisation in Papua as part of a Law Asian Studies degree some years ago. She then went to Oxford with a Rhodes Scholarship, and after completing her master's degree was in 2008 named by the UK Attorney General as a national pro bono hero for her contribution to international advisory work on law and human rights. Recently, you may well have seen Jennifer instructing prominent international barrister Jeffrey Robertson QC in the defence of WikiLeaks' Julian Assange. An interesting trajectory from Asian studies. In 2008, Jennifer emailed me to say, and I quote, "I come from rural Australia, southern coast New South Wales, and had I not had the opportunity to study Indonesian in school and then pursue it at university and through the Archichis program, my life today would be very different, and my life experience nowhere near as rich or as diverse. Indeed, that life experience was, I believe, integral to me being awarded the Rhodes Scholarship and will be integral to my future career. I will always be grateful for that." At the risk of embarrassing him, we have present today someone for whom a year studying in Indonesia in a very different way also had a profound effect. When a Member of Parliament gives their maiden speech to the House, it's an opportunity to describe something of their personal and political philosophy and the influences that have led them to elected office. When the member for Cannington in the West Australian Parliament, Mr. Bill Johnston, MLA, rose to present his inaugural speech in November 2008, Amongst the well-known names of state and federal politicians and tributes to family and friends was this telling inclusion. I quote, "I acknowledge keluarga Sumo Wigondo, the family with whom I lived in Bandung, Indonesia during my AFS exchange in 1981-82, and the friends I made both at SMA 2 and among the exchange students. It was a powerful experience for a young bloke, and it still lives with me today. The Indonesian family with whom Bill lived as a teenager some 26 years ago in Bandung remained pivotal to who he was and what led him into Parliament. And my belief is that we need 1 million Jennifers and Bills." For the next 3 days, we're going to be thinking about the future of Indonesian in our universities. I've mentioned the bulk of funding came from the ALTC. The ALTC was responding to a much broader concern about languages in Australian education. I'm pleased to say that Professor Kerry Dunn is later going to be updating us about another ALTC program supporting the establishment of a national network for university language leaders for future generations. Very positive developments. Sadly, however, you may also be aware that the Prime Minister has recently announced that the ALTC will cease at the end of this year. My question is, where then will come the support for teaching innovations and projects such as ours in Indonesian language more particularly? I'm sure most of you in this room are aware of the findings of the 2010 study by Michelle Kohler and Philip Mencken, the current state of Indonesian language education in Australian schools. I won't repeat it, except to say, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it concluded that while Indonesian remains a major language in our schools, and I quote, "the number of programs offered and the students studying the language are in serious decline. Indonesian is now at risk, low candidature at senior secondary level, attracting only just over 1,100 students in year 12, less than 1% of that cohort, with enrolments nationally declining by about 10,000 school students annually." On the other side of the equation, the government's National Asian Languages and Studies in School program that Pak Primo referred to indeed has invested $62.4 million over the period 2008 to 11, with the aim of at least 12% of our students exiting year 12 by the year 2020 with sufficient competence in one of the 4 target Asian languages, including Indonesian, to enable them to participate in trade and commerce or in university study. And I'm very pleased that Ms. Amanda Dane, the director of that program, joins us in the Colloquium. NALSP is a vital initiative and its staff are to be complimented for their efforts to make it a success. But I suspect we would all agree with Pak Primo that the funding made available for NALSP is nowhere near sufficient, and the duration of that funding, again, falls well short of what would be required to produce the outcomes articulated in that program. But what of our universities? Again, those of you who had a chance to read the discussion paper will see that 3 sets of data, White and Boldorf, the Asian Studies annual surveys and my own attempts, indicate the general downward trend. Essentially, we're now at a situation where only 2 universities have more FTSL, that is equivalent full-time student load, more than 30. If we crudely convert that to actual students, it's about 100 students. Only 2 universities would have more than that. My own survey underscores these findings with provisional data suggesting a drop nationally between 2002 and 2009 of 30% in the jurisdictions of Tasmania, ACT and the Northern Territory combined, it's about 39%. In Queensland, it is 49% decline. If Kohler and Mencken found that less than 1% of Year 12 students are studying Indonesian at universities, by my calculation, it's not anywhere near 1%. It's not even 0.5%. It's about 1/20th of 1% of our students are doing any Indonesian language.